Hi, everyone. If you're like me, you have found mobile phones in the classroom to be both a blessing and a curse. There are times when I want my students to have access to the outside world, but there are other times when I just want my students fully engaged in the classroom without distracting technology. This is where our sponsor Flipped comes in. Flipped is a first-ever classroom engagement application that keeps students from getting distracted by their mobile phones when they're learning, and it does it in a really clever way. Some instructors have even reported that Flipped has been associated with increased grades and reduction in attrition. If you are interested in learning more about Flipped, please visit flippedapp.co/psych. That's FLIPPDAPP.co/psych. Welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld, along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. This is a special edition of the Psych Sessions podcast, IntroPsychSessions, conversations about teaching introductory psychology, where we showcase some of the best teachers from across the nation, from high school, 2-year, and 4-year institutions. We hope that you'll find this helpful as you go to prepare your own intro psych class for the upcoming year, as we talk about assessment, course design, and pretty much everything else. So let's get right into it. Please enjoy Intro Psych Sessions. Well, I'm here at University of West Florida in Pensacola, Florida, and I am in the office of Jane Halonen. Hi, Jane.
Hi.
We're back. And today we're going to talk about introductory psychology, and I've prepped her about what we're doing, that I'm going to just fire off some questions at you about it.
I'm ready.
And let's do this first. Can you the first few questions are just going to be giving us an idea of where you teach, what it's like, what your students are like. So I'll just run through those questions. So,
sure.
I've already said University, West Florida. What should we know about teaching an introductory psychology class at University? Is it of West Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, University of West Florida.
Yeah. We are a regional comprehensive university, and so that is the kind of university that has, I think, the noblest of missions, which is a democratic, open access education, a 4-year program. And I have, for the last 15 years, had the distinctive opportunity of teaching the honors intro class. So the students that I have are in the probably top 10% of students that come to University of West Florida. When I was a dean here, which I was for 10 years, I also taught honors intro as a way of keeping my hand in the craft that I love. And when I returned to the faculty 4 or 5 years ago, fortunately, I was able to keep that assignment. So every fall I teach honors intro.
Now, I know you love teaching in
Yep.
general, and it's probably been a while, but you've taught non-honors introductory psychology?
I have, and it's been a long time ago.
Okay.
I'm going to say maybe as long as 20 years ago.
Yep. Okay, so today we are talking about this in particular, these honors students that you teach. So why does your institution offer an honors introductory psychology course?
It's a good question. I think partly because this is a fairly popular choice for students who are coming in who have not had AP psychology or some variation of psychology. It also means that in my honors intro class, I don't tend to get a lot of majors, because if you're majoring in psychology, chances are good you've ended up in a higher level psychology class because you've gotten AP credit. So that makes it a little bit of a twist.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking that if you would have asked me, do I have more majors or non-majors in my course, that you would have said majors, but you're saying no.
No, I rarely have majors unless I stand on them to become majors because I see the spark. Yep. I see that they would be really good in psychology, and I convert quite a few people into majors.
Yep. So how are these students getting into an honors course? Is it just because they're high-achieving students?
High-achieving students, that they have good SAT or ACT scores, and that they're coming to us with good grade point averages, and they enter our honors program, which means they take some courses that are designed interdisciplinary courses for honor students. And then there are a few options that they can take, specialized courses like mine in the discipline where they can pick up some honors credit.
Right. And then when they graduate, they have some sort of
They have a
honors.
thesis that they have to complete, and then they get the special designation, and they get to go to conferences, and they actually end up having some advantages, early registration, and a few other perks that non-honor students don't get.
Great.
Smaller class sizes. My class size is pretty small.
Okay, that's my next question. So how big is it?
Normally, my class has about 18 students in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say last semester, through a quirk of registration, I had 9 students. And we had a picnic because you can really get to know 9 students really well. The university technically shouldn't have let me run the class with so few, but because I was teaching some other very high enrollment classes, they just said, oh, let her go. Let her do this class that she loves.
There you go. So when you are thinking, before the course starts, when you're thinking about this introductory psychology course, what do you do in the preceding week, month before this course begins?
Since I've been teaching honors intro, I've been teaching intro for over 30 years. It's not like I have to go, well, how am I going to do this class? I will go back and revisit the last time I taught the class, PowerPoints that I've used, examples that I've used, and try to update those. And I try to do that over the summer because my honors course teaches in the fall. I want to be ready. I want to be ready to hit the ground. Another element that I tend to do is if students are interested in college teaching, if majors want to become college teachers of psychology, I will make open the opportunity for students who've impressed me to come into my honors course as a teaching assistant to get the experience of what it's like to do some grading. I don't need them to help me because it's a small class size, but the fact is I can give them an experience of pulling a lecture together and looking at what the dilemmas are that happen when you're teaching freshmen, mostly freshmen. There are plenty of those. And so I want to make sure that I get my teaching apprentice in place if I'm going to have one, and then plan accordingly.
Okay. And how do you structure the course? So 16-week semester?
16-week semester. Mm-hmm. I operate on quarters, and the way I define quarters is atypical. The first quarter, for example, is we're going to do a long session. My classes, by the way, are 3 hours long, once a week for 3 hours.
Yes, very important.
Very important element, which gives me, obviously, an incentive not to lecture for 3 hours, because who would want to sit through that?
Or do it.
or do it, yeah. So it gives me a great opportunity to change up what I'm doing within the 3 hours. But in the very first class, when students come, I'm sure you know a lot of students come to the first class and they think they're going to get the syllabus and then they're gone. My class is a 3-hour class where we start talking about how you know what you know. How do you know what a behavior is? How do you make sense of what a behavior is? Sometimes we tell 2 truths and a tale as a way of trying to understand how do you decide when I'm lying versus when I'm telling the truth. So you're a kind of lay psychologist already. You've got a lot of personal theories that you've developed. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. I make a point to have every student talk in the first class because I was horribly shy in college and hated to be called on. And part of it was if you never get your voice in the class, it becomes easy to be a passive student. And so I make sure all students talk. So that first quarter, we have orientation. We look at research methods, and then we look at social, which is very different than most organizations, in part because I want to empower students with the fact that psychology is just hellishly fun. And social is the best way to do that.
And you have a chapter on that in the Hard Done book on themes of teaching introductory psychology. Right?
Yes.
And so you talk more about it there.
Yes.
But that has been one thing I've noticed in talking with teachers of intro psych, successful teachers, I would say, of intro psych, and I'm going to edit this. But is that there is a hook very early on and I've already heard two hooks. One is in the very first day, having students do this 2 truths and a lie, telling them they already know how to think through these things to some extent, and then you're going to teach them how to do it like a psychologist.
Correct.
And then the second hook is this social psychology chapter.
Yes.
Why is it important to hook your students early on in this course?
Because 16 weeks is a long time, and most psychology textbooks are set up not to include the hook. Research methods is not easy to learn. It can be fun if taught properly, but it's not easy to learn. The history of psychology for people who don't have a psych background is deadly. I teach history. I love history, but trying to help students understand functionalism versus structuralism is a waste of your time and effort, if you ask me. So I want to be able to have them do things they can do to get excited about what psychology offers. What is it that you're going to learn in psychology? I love to concentrate on, here's all the stuff that psychology is not. Sometimes I administer a misconceptions test to see how wrong are their ideas.
All first quarter, you're doing all
first
this.
quarter.
Yeah. And so when you're talking social psych, are you reaching back to research methods and pulling it into the social?
I am.
Okay.
Right. And one of the things that I discovered years and years ago when I was an intro textbook author, that we tend to compartmentalize research methods. We talk about research methods, and then when you move into the discipline areas, you don't bring those elements forward. And so is it any wonder that most of our students, when they get out of intro, they still can't identify independent and dependent variables? And so my goal is every quarter, whatever here's an example, which the independent variable was. Remember, we talked about this in the first quarter? Here it comes again, that I want my students for sure to understand what that difference is and why it's important in a psychological way of thinking.
Are there other themes, so you've got the experiment theme here running through your course. Are there other themes that you run through your course?
Yeah, I would say that the what's your evidence theme, that I'm pretty upfront about the fact that I'm going to work on how students think about what to believe in. And is what they're believing in, is it sufficiently empirically validated? Why is that important? Why should data drive what they think? And so I love to solicit examples from students, especially in the research methods piece, about family traditions, things that they were taught to believe that probably aren't true, like the crow tapping on the window means someone's going to die. Really? Your family generate a lot of interest and energy in that, and has it been put to a test? How would we test that? So getting students to get excited about using methods to answer questions that will be meaningful to them.
Great.
Yeah.
So other quarters. So that's the first quarter?
First quarter. Well, let me mention as well that I end the first quarter. I do just 3 chapters, 2 or 3 chapters in the first quarter, and then I do a very traditional multiple choice test. I also teach them something about Bloom's taxonomy so that they can understand my test questions aren't tricky,
right,
but high level.
Yeah.
And that I say this is why you're in honors, that I'm going to be giving you challenges that are more significant than you might if you were in another intro class.
So I've read about your use of Bloom's taxonomy. Do you revisit that throughout the course as well, or is that something you just kind of put out there at first?
I do tend to revisit that in most of my classes to give students a way to think about, especially if they're getting ready for a multiple choice test, that if they can recognize the term, oh yay, that's not going to be good enough to pass my test, that they have to be able to apply that term. They have to be able to recognize it in its use. They have to be able to think beyond what they learned in the textbook. And at least for honor students, they usually resonate with the message. They don't always take it seriously, and their very first exam, they might not do so well. And so then we can talk about study strategies as well.
Right. So multiple choice questions out of test banks, publisher test banks. What do you think?
I don't use them, even though I've written for them, and I apologize to all the publishers who may be listening to this right now. I happen to love writing good multiple choice questions, and I think when I write them, especially when I start up a new exam, I may use some old items that I've written, but I'm also going to incorporate some new stuff based on whatever is new that I've covered this round. And you really can't do that out of a test bank.
Yep. So,
and they tend to be geared toward lower level.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So you're not covering the entire 16 chapters of an introductory psychology textbook?
Not necessarily, and not in a traditional way. And that will become really clear when we get to quadrant 3.
Okay. So let's go through 2, 3, 4.
Okay. So the first quarter, we do something that looks more traditional. And then I say, okay, multiple choice. If you did well, great. If you didn't do well, you might have an opportunity to go back and tell me why you did wrong. Tell me what was the logic behind your answers, because I'm interested in having you correct your study strategy as well. Then in the second quadrant, what I do, the second quarter, we focus on under the skin. What's going on in the brain, in motivation, in emotion. I try to make sure that I end up covering the stress chapter right around midterm time, when life is really stressful, so that they've got a little bit more incentive to pay attention to that. But I'm upfront with them that their exam is posted on e-learning day 1 of class for this quarter. And here's the exam. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but it's the first day of class. You told me what you like to do as a leisure activity. Tell me how you do that. Then I give them a set of 10 questions that walks them through various aspects of sensation and perception, motivation. I ask them to experience some sort of awful stress, like maybe your house burning down, and how does that affect your ability to be able to do what you want to do. So that can be, I like to bake cookies. That can be, I like to juggle. It has to be some sort of overt behavior. I make sure that I approve all the behaviors that they're going to be writing about. And the really fun part of that is these are a hoot to read. You get to know students really well. You sort of get a sense of who they are on the outside. And with well-structured questions and the instruction that write this piece where you're talking about brain parts. What brain parts are active while you're strumming your guitar?
Yeah. It seems to me like good. No, I usually try to stay out for these, but I can't help myself, as I told you.
Yep.
It seems to me like good assignments are not only bringing content and skills together, but also this maybe rapport piece with students where they get to share something of themselves.
Correct.
Application, concrete examples,
right.
Whatever those things are, playing guitar.
Well, they get very excited about that, and then I get to learn more.
Yeah.
But as well, it's pretty reliable that when students turn the assignment in, they say, I'll never be able to do this leisure activity without thinking about what my brain is doing.
Oh, so good.
To which I say, well, yippee, haven't I succeeded in exactly what I wanted to do? And then they roll their eyes and go, yes, Jane, you have succeeded.
They call you Jane.
They do, yeah.
Ah, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I give them that option.
Yep.
And I know that's a controversial point, especially as a female faculty member, where sometimes we say, usually what I do is I give them a speech. You may call me Dr. Halonen. You may call me Professor Halonen. You can call me Jane because that's my name and it's a little more efficient, and that's how I'll be signing emails as well. But don't call me Mrs. or Ms. Halonen. I don't respond to those two things.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Third quarter.
Third quarter, yes.
Third quarter is the hodgepodge of chapters that goes along with development, language, intelligence, etc. At this point, what I say to students is, now we're going to do a group project because I want you to learn how to function in groups. And you're going to be applying some of that social psychology stuff you learned in Quadrant 1. But I'm going to put you in groups, and I'm going to ask you to solve a problem by creating a product that uses psychology. And they look at me like I must be some sort of Martian when I bring this up. But basically I'm saying I'm looking for you to use 5 good concepts from any of the chapters that we're doing in this quadrant. And so it's up to your creativity, and let me encourage you, be creative on this because it'll be the most fun. So I've had some rather remarkable projects over time. In fact, one that listeners won't be able to take advantage of, but you can see that Chutes and Ladders variation at the top on my bookshelf. Okay, so students took a Chutes and Ladders game and turned it into How to Survive College. It's college Chutes and Ladders. And then they have to present it as a group, so they have to go through public speaking in my class. And they have to learn teamwork. They have to evaluate each other on whether or not the points should be equitably shared across each other, which generates some anxiety, but usually minimizes social loafing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you do multiple choice testing on these quarters as well?
I do not.
You don't? Okay.
No, because by this time, I know they can study intensively. I know in the writing that they do in the second quarter that they can write well. Now I'm focusing on teamwork, and I don't feel responsible for covering every concept in that traditional way, because if the projects are distributed well, they're going to cover a lot of the concepts for me.
Right. And are they working on these projects in class?
Some of the class time is devoted to them working, but I also say to do this well and to rehearse properly, you can't rehearse in my class. You can spend a little bit of time doing the time management issues in the class, but you will have to figure out how to do this on the outside.
Right. Are you there doesn't sound like there is an average day in your class because it's changing so much, but are you doing activities or demonstrations or lectures sometimes?
Always. A mix of everything, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do lecture. I absolutely love to produce good, visually compelling PowerPoints to help students learn the material.
Yep.
Some of those are cartoon intensive, which they appreciate. But at least in this third quarter, what I've learned is that students remember this activity almost as well as they remember what I do in the fourth quarter, which is sort of the legendary part of the course.
Let's do it.
The legendary part of the course is I save what most students regard as the most interesting, the clinical crazy stuff, of which I'm pretty well versed as a clinical psychologist and ex-private practitioner. That we do personality, we do treatment, and abnormal as the last quarter. And in the last class that we have, what I prepare students for, and again, this is posted in e-learning day one, this is what we're doing for the final, the last of the four, they're going to interview a client and come up with a treatment plan and a diagnosis and what they shouldn't do with the client and what ethical things they have to look out for. And I invite a student, typically someone who's been in my class before, to come in. They get to pick who they're going to pretend to be. It needs to be a famous dead person, because I don't want anyone coming to sue me for what's going to happen. And that student will bone up on the life circumstances of that human being and then come in and face my class. They have to ask questions that will help them come up with a diagnosis and everything else that follows in clinical work. So my class has been visited by Charles Manson, Marilyn Monroe, Emily Dickinson, Kurt Cobain, Sylvia Plath, you name it. I mean, students love this acting job. It's totally improv. And for the most part, they're pretty good about staying in character. Sometimes they dress the role. They come in looking prim and proper. And students, while they're scared about this in the beginning, they absolutely get swept up in the process of how do you build on other people's questions? How do you make sure that you do a good mental status exam, that you make sure you ask the person, what year is this? I also say we step into the Wayback Machine and the person dictates what year we're operating in. So the last person we had, the Charles Manson impersonator, who was creepily good, I have to say, chose the first time Charles Manson was about to get out of jail. So he hadn't quite committed the crimes yet. And then students, by this time, their grades are pretty well set. So I have the luxury of saying, I don't care if you talk to each other about what your conclusions are. I don't want you to write together. But you certainly can argue with each other because you're probably not going to agree on everything because clinicians don't tend to agree. And so then if that's the last class, they turn the exam in on Friday. I grade it over the weekend. The next time they come back and see me, which is usually a Tuesday evening or late afternoon, I have everything graded, and we spend what normally should be the final exam hour talking about the experience that they had. And how does this fit with the syllabus? We go back and look at the syllabus. We look at everything I said I was going to promise them as an outcome and get some judgment about how well did we meet what your expectations were. And typically students get so excited about this, they get so swept up that they have a hard time letting go when the hour is up. And all I have to do is I basically wind them up, and they teach each other. And then the conversations vary. How is it you decided that this is a schizoaffective, or why are you saying bipolar, and having to defend their positions, and to do that in pretty animated fashion. I also ask in the final, was this hard? And they go, damn straight it was hard. This is so much harder than it looks on TV. And I said, well, that's the point, isn't it? That this isn't the kind of thing that you can't just run around being a psychologist with people. It takes a lot of training, a lot of work, a lot of discipline to be able to do things well and right and safely. And I think they leave the class with that message. But that's the experience that most students talk about in connection with my class.
Right. So final exam looks like what?
That is the final exam.
Oh, that is it?
Yep.
Okay.
That is the final exam. So the questions that are part of the protocol are ones that do tend to integrate a little bit across. What behaviors did you observe? How is that different than what you're inferring about the behaviors? It goes right back to the very first day of class.
Okay. So I have a couple other questions.
Sure.
How do you come up with your outcomes for the introductory psychology course?
Well, because I am Outcomes Are Us, having been
True.
involved with APA guidelines forever, I have fashioned my outcomes to match APA guidelines, and so my outcomes are in those 5 areas that the APA guidelines are, and I think I know that's going to be the next up project for APA. I'm going to be happy to share those guidelines when it happens. So it's communication, critical thinking, ethics, professional development, project management, we call it around here, and content.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and are you happy with your introductory psychology course?
In love with, I guess, would substitute for am I happy? Yeah, I love the class. I love helping students have a comparable experience to what I have when I took intro, when I fell in love. And I'm pretty overt with them that that's my goal, is that I don't want them just to have this be a class. I want them to love this class. And most of the time that succeeds pretty wildly, that students very much enjoy the class and let me know in teaching evaluations and notes and other gestures how much they really appreciate the approach I take.
Here, great. And here's a question that I haven't asked any of my interviewees on this yet, but extra credit. Do you do extra credit?
I do extra credit. I'm not keen about extra credit, but I do it. I've learned to do it in all my classes, in part because it does empower students not to feel hopeless. I'm very upfront about the fact that extra credit is not going to save your butt if you get in a jam. The best it's going to be is boundary insurance. But if there is something going on that is psych-related, you can do extra credit in my class. And what I often do is if you go to a play that's being put on at the UWF Theater Department and link it to psych principles, that'll be worth some extra credit. So students do that. We also have taken up a practice here. I almost hate to say this in case this gets out because it'll create competition, but we contact high flyer psychologists and ask them to Skype with our psych-high folks. So this month we're going to be talking with Robert Cialdini, who's going to Skype in with my psych-high students, and we make that open to students for extra credit. They have to do a write-up on it instead of just going. They have to say what they learned as a consequence. And then I limit how much extra credit they can produce so that they're not trying to extra credit their way into a new grade category.
Right. So if you had to estimate, like, what percentage of their grade could be extra credit?
No more than 2%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Is there anything that you'd like to change about your course at this point, or are you pretty happy?
I'm pretty happy with it. I think I'd like not to teach it as late at night as I've been teaching it, because I think that's a bit of a hardship for my students. And I'm not sure why it is I've settled in this time slot of I teach from 5 to 7:45. But I think I started doing it because they had other course obligations that I recognized when I did it late afternoon. They came in, they were exhausted. I want to give them a little bit of time in between me and their traditional honors class. And then I also am a little bit constrained in where I teach because I want to make sure that I have courses designed to be over at a particular point so I can go do the campus visiting that I often do as a consultant.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to do this. I think that was really, really helpful. One of the things that I got out of this is just there are these voices that speak to folks in introductory psychology, and I'm not going where you think I'm going, but this voice that says you can't do this class a different way. You've got to do it in the traditional way. And one of the things that you have shown is that you can let those voices kind of go.
Oh, by all means.
And you can do it in a way that is really meaningful to students.
And in fact, I would add, kill the voice that says cover the content. Just do not pay attention to that voice because students are not going to remember the minutia of the content that we present in intro. They are simply not going to, even if they become majors. And so better to give them experiences that help create Velcro learning that stays with them.
And what percentage of so if you have a 16-chapter textbook in front of you, what percentage of the content do you think your students are getting out of that textbook?
I'd say probably 75.
75%.
Yep.
You heard it here first. You can drop 25%. Jane does. So there you go.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
All right.